I've always been the one to take the hits so others didn't have to. I habitually took the wounds for others, choosing the high road not out of selflessness as a virtue, but as a weary insistence that I would not return harm for harm. I'd rather rebuild alone in silence than let someone else sit in the rubble of their own consequences. I went without, I endured, I carved off pieces of myself, shrinking smaller and smaller to fit inside a box that was never mine. Its walls pressing closer each day, stilling my breath, dimming my light, until even my soul began to blur at the edges, like a figure fading into the mist. But not this time. This time, I'm fighting back. Not with fist and not with rage. I'm using my God-given voice. I'm telling the story that I was never allowed to speak. This is how I remind myself and anyone who might be listening that survival is not the end of the story. Resurrection is. And this is the story of how I finally reached for God for the first time in my life, of how I came to know Jesus after running from him for so many years. My prayer is that you hear my story, you'll also hear his voice, and maybe, just maybe, begin to find your own. This is The Turtle and the Hailstorm. For years, God's voice rose inside me through my anger, my tears, and my intuition, urging me to wake up. But I kept pressing it down. And he knew. My ex-husband stirred storms, building a cage out of chaos, weaving confusion around me like bars. Every fire I had to put out, every responsibility, every fight, it was all part of his design, his trap. Noise and turmoil meant to keep me too busy and too weary to hear myself, too busy to hear God. Bit by bit, he crossed the boundaries I thought were unshakable, and each time, I adjusted. I pulled the line back closer to me, shrinking smaller, giving him more ground, more power. Until one day, he stood so close he could spit in my face, and yet I stayed silent, tucked inside my own surrender. And that's how it went for years. Looking back now, I can see the whole pattern. He was the hailstorm, sudden and violent, pounding against me again and again, and I was the turtle, hiding in my shell, waiting for it to pass. But the truth is, I wasn't just hiding, I was caged, trapped inside walls I had built smaller and smaller around myself, mistaking survival for safety. I didn't have the words for it then, but my soul knew. It spoke in fragments of dreams and flashes of truth and restless whispers I couldn't quite hold, because God was there, breaking through the noise. But I couldn't hear him, not yet. But now, I speak because I've learned to listen. God's voice met me in places I never expected, not only in scripture but in silence, not only in prayer but in dreams. In the stillness where truth hides and waits to be found, through visions and revelations, he showed me my path. After I left, God spoke to me more powerfully than I had ever known. His voice was steady and sure, but the moment that changed everything, the true turning point, came just before I left. There had been an especially volatile night. He cursed at me, my son, and his friends. It was the first time I had ever had to tell my child to lock his bedroom door and not open it, no matter what he heard. He had never been physical with me before, but that night it came close. And he had pushed my 15-year-old son before. My son had always been his preferred target. The next day, I was in my daughter's room, the room I had claimed weeks earlier after another argument. It had become my whole world. I worked there, I ate there, I slept there. 4 walls that held my exile, my silence, my unraveling. My heart was racing, my breath jagged and uneven, panic wrapped tight around my chest. I hadn't prayed in more than a decade, and even then it was only when I was reckless, when I wanted to be spared from my own danger. But this time was different. This was no bargaining, this was surrender, the rawest kind of plea a soul can give. I dropped to my knees on the floor, tears tearing their way out of me, jagged, raw, and uncontainable. Not the kind of cry you can hide, but the kind that racks your body and strips you bare. And I prayed, God, help me. Please. I don't know what to do. If I'm meant to stay, then soften me. Make me more patient, less angry, less bitter, and change him. Shape him into the man that I've begged for. But God, if I'm meant to go, then help me go. When the words left my mouth, help me go, something happened. It was as if a hand reached into my chest, steady and sure, and stilled the chaos inside me. The sobs cut off mid-breath. Peace, sudden and undeniable, flooded in where the panic had been. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, go, and go now. I rose from the floor, wiped the salt from my face, and opened my laptop. I began looking for apartments, and 4 days later, I was gone. But what came next wasn't relief, not at first. It was silence, thick and unfamiliar. A silence so loud it rang in my ears, because for the first time in years there was no storm to brace against, no shouting to shrink beneath, just me and the quiet I had forgotten how to bear. And in that quiet, my body began to unravel. It was like detoxing from a drug I hadn't known I was hooked on, adrenaline. Years of stress had crystallized inside me, grinding in my joints, stiffening my limbs, leaving me barely able to walk when I left. My body had been shutting down piece by piece, carrying the weight of everything that I had never said. But now in the silence, it finally had space to let go. Once I had everything in its temporary place, bags unzipped, clothes folded into borrowed drawers, my toothbrush resting in a bathroom that wasn't mine, I stood on the second floor of my friend's house and just breathed. My apartment wouldn't be ready for 6 weeks, so I stayed there in the meantime, and as it turned out, it was exactly where I needed to be, set apart, sheltered, given space to unravel and begin again. For the first time in years, breath didn't feel like survival, it felt like space. My lungs opened wider than they had in so long, as if even they were startled by the sudden permission to expand. And still, a part of me didn't trust it. My body flinched at the quiet, braced for footsteps that never came, for a voice that never rose, for the storm that wasn't waiting outside the door. Breathing felt both holy and dangerous, like freedom I hadn't yet earned. But slowly, my body began to remember. It relished the strange luxury of sleep stretched out like a starfish instead of curled into a tight little ball, bracing for impact. There was no one to manage now, no one to protect, no one to apologize for or tiptoe around. It was just me. But the guilt would come in waves, heavy and suffocating. It pressed against my ribs like a stone on my chest. My son had gone to stay with his biological father, and my daughter was already away at college, but still, the weight of leaving crushed me. I told myself they were safe, but my heart refused to let me rest. The deepest ache was for the son that I hadn't given birth to, but who had still called me Mom for years. Walking away felt like I was leaving him too. I tried to tell myself he still had his father, but that truth didn't soften the blow. That storm followed me into the quiet. It whispered in the dark, curling around me like smoke. You left him. You left him too. The words echoed louder each time until they were all that I could hear, and I realized guilt was never from God. Guilt was the enemy's favorite weapon, a chain he used to drag me back toward the cage I had just escaped. But I couldn't go back. I knew I had to save myself first, because the broken version of me could never bring healing to anyone else. To outsiders, it may have looked selfish, abandoning my family, leaving behind children that I loved, walking away from the home that I had built. But the truth was, I was drowning and no one even saw it. I was gasping for air in plain sight, suffocating in silence, invisible in my own house. Going back would not have saved anyone. It would have only pulled me under for good, and the poison in me would have seeped deeper into everyone else. The poison had to be removed, and I had to be the one to cut it out, first from my life and then from my family's. It was the only way forward. As I sat in that borrowed space, surrounded by unfamiliar walls and a quiet that didn't belong to me, something inside me began to stir. For the first time in years, there was nothing I had to fix, nothing I had to defend, no storm demanding that I brace myself, just the stillness. Then slowly, God began to speak. Not with thunder and not with fire, but in the way he so often does, through a dream. In the dream, I stood in a dense gray fog. It wrapped around me like a blanket I couldn't push off. Thick, heavy, and endless. The silence was absolute. Then, through the mist, a figure began to take shape. At first, only a shadow, then slowly, step by step, she emerged. It was me. Not the hollow version I had become, but the woman I used to be, the one who was creative and funny and strong. She carried a spark in her eyes, a freedom in her posture, and a light I thought I had lost forever. The moment I recognized her, I broke. My knees hit the ground and I wept, choking on my own apologies. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I left you. I'm so sorry I forgot you. Please forgive me. She didn't hesitate. She knelt beside me, wrapped her arms around me, and together we cried. No blame, no shame, just reunion. And then, without a word, she began to merge into me slowly and completely, like she had always belonged. I woke with tears on my pillow and warmth blooming in my chest, a glow that I hadn't felt in years. Something had shifted. I was starting to come home to myself. Not long after, another dream came, this one softer and more tender. I was sitting with a little girl in my lap. She had brown curls that bounced around her face, bright blue eyes that sparkled with mischief, and a voice that never stopped chattering. She was radiant, full of joy, full of life, full of herself in the most beautiful way. I watched her as she laughed and talked, her tiny hands moving as if she were telling the world's most important story. And with a smile I couldn't hold back, I turned to the figure standing beside me and said, "She's the most adorable little girl. She has such an amazing personality. I just love her." The one beside me, Jesus, looked at me and said, "You should, because she's yours." And in that instance, I understood. The little girl was me, the child version of me, the one who had been silenced, pushed aside, and forgotten. The dream was a gift from God to let me see myself through His eyes, and to feel deep in my bones how much He loves me. For the first time, His love wasn't an idea, it was real, it was present, and it was mine. Not earned and not bargained for, just given because I was His. Because I had always been His, even when I ran, even when I forgot, even when I thought I was unworthy of being loved at all. Then came another dream, this one unlike the rest. I saw myself, but not from within my own body. I was looking from above, as if through God's eyes. There I was, standing face to face with Jesus. His hand rested gently against my left cheek. He brushed my hair back, wiped the tears from my eyes as though he were cleaning me up, preparing me to be seen. And his gaze, it was softer than anything I had ever known. No judgment, no pity, just love, deep, unwavering love. As he held me close, I became aware that we weren't alone. Encircling us were the 12 disciples, silent, still, and watching. It was as if they were bearing witness to something sacred, the moment I was being introduced to him for the very first time. And somehow, I knew this wasn't just a dream, it was a remembering, a recognition of where I truly belonged and to whom I had always belonged. That love didn't stop when I woke. It lingered, settling into places I didn't know were empty. For years, I had carried walls around my heart, thick, heavy, and unyielding, but now, those walls began to crack. These dreams weren't random or fleeting, they were divine interventions, holy moments of reintroduction. God wasn't just showing me who I had been, He was revealing who I had always been to Him. And slowly, my heart began to soften, because how could it not? If I was sitting on God's lap, if Jesus Himself was wiping away my tears and brushing the hair away from my face, then what was I still defending myself against? There was no longer any need for hate or resentment or anger, no need for the walls I had built to keep out the pain because I was no longer alone in protecting myself. God was holding me now, shielding me, restoring me, and so I let it all go. Because I began to see it for what it was. Those chains weren't mine at all. The enemy wanted me bound to them. He wanted me calloused, unloving, and hateful. He wanted me so full of bitterness it would curdle inside me, souring every thought and every word. He wanted me so emptied of joy that there would never be room for God's love to fill me. But I would not carry his chains another step, not anymore. I laid it all down finally and completely, and I didn't pick it back up. Then came the last dream, the one that showed me who I was becoming. I stood alone in a vast open field circled by towering oak trees. The air was sharp and clean, as if a storm or cleansing fire had just passed through. Where once a great fortress had stood, brick by brick, wall by wall, there was nothing left but ash. Smoke curled gently upward, dissolving into the sky. The fortress I had built to guard my heart, to hold myself together, had burned to the ground. But what struck me most was this: I hadn't felt the fire. No sting, no heat, no panic. The walls had surrendered quietly, their purpose complete. At my feet, the ground was dark and broken. Shards of blackened stone jutted out like bones, splintered beams sagged into the dirt, and the air carried the bitter tang of things long dead. The soil was scarred, stripped bare by the weight of what had fallen. And yet, threading through the ruin were hints of life. Tiny green sprouts pushing through the ash, fragile but relentless. Hope muscling its way out of the decay. And in the stillness that followed, I did not mourn the ruins, I felt free. And then, she was there. A flash of movement at the edge of the field, breaking the stillness like thunder. A lioness stepping out from the shadow of the trees, her body powerful, golden in the rising sun. She did not creep or hesitate. She arrived, fierce, certain, commanding the ground beneath her paws as if it had always belonged to her. Her eyes locked onto mine, steady and unflinching, and I felt the truth surge through me. This was not some distant creature to admire. This was me. I looked down and my hands were no longer hands. They had become paws, solid and sure, against the earth. My chest rose with a new strength, my pulse steady, my body alive with power I hadn't known was waiting inside me. I was no longer the turtle shrinking back into silence. I was the lioness, bold, unafraid, and fully alive. And as I stood there, I understood. This is what it feels like to speak, to tell a story no one wanted me to tell, to take back my voice, my strength, my place. No one saw this coming, not him, not the storm, not even me. And then I moved. First a step, and then a stride, and then I was running faster, freer, stronger than I have ever known. The field stretched wide beneath me, and I claimed every inch of it. I chased the wind until it whipped through my mane, rolled in the dirt with abandon, leapt high into the shafts of golden light breaking through the trees. My heart pounded, not with fear, not with panic, but with life, with joy, with the rhythm of freedom coursing through my veins. I was untethered, untamed, alive in a way I had never been before. For years I had been silent, but here in this dream I could finally feel it, what it meant to belong to myself, to God, to the life He had always meant for me. I was not the turtle anymore. I was the lioness, and the world would hear me roar. And as I ran, as I reveled in this new strength, I felt it, that I was not alone. From the edge of the field a figure emerged, a man clad in the armor of a Roman soldier. His beard was dark, his frame strong, his presence commanding in a way that made you instinctively stand taller. He was clearly a leader, the kind others looked to, the kind who carried the weight of battle without needing to prove it. But in this moment, his helmet was off. He stood at the side of the field, resting, watching his men strain against the weight of massive boulders as they pushed them across the dirt. He didn't shout or berate them. He guided with a quiet authority, his eyes steady, his voice unspoken but felt. And then he looked at me. Our eyes met across the field, and something passed between us, not ownership, not demand, but recognition, a knowing. And as I watched, he changed. His form shifted, armor dissolving, body stretching and reshaping until he stood not as a man, but as a lion, powerful, majestic, still watching and still waiting. And in that moment I knew it was prophecy. This was the man that God would one day bring into my life, a man who had walked through his own fire, who had fought and healed and risen again, a man who would not silence my roar, but add his to it. We would roar together, not for ourselves, not for revenge, but for God, for His kingdom, for freedom, for healing, for resurrection, as guides and symbols reminding the world that healing doesn't isolate, it connects. When I woke from that dream, I could still feel it pulsing through me, the roar, the freedom, and the promise. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't a lioness. I was still me, broken, silent, alone, and weak. And yet, something had changed, because for the first time, I knew what I wanted. I wanted that. That strength, that freedom, that presence of God so alive within me that I could run without fear, roar without shame, and live without chains. So I whispered into the emptiness of that borrowed room, God, can I have that? Please, can I have that? And then I dropped to my knees, not in confusion and not in fear, but in surrender. I knelt on the floor, trembling, the dream still alive in my chest, and I prayed the most honest words I had ever spoken. God, I've made a mess of my life. I have no idea what I'm doing, and I need you. So I'm yours from here on out. I don't want the life I've built for myself. I want the life that you have for me. Just show me how to let you guide me. Teach me how to hear you. I won't put limits on how you choose to speak. If it's scripture, I'll read. If it's silence, I'll wait. If it's dreams, I'll listen. Just show me the way, and I'll follow. I'm on roller skates. Just take me by the hand, and I won't refuse. And that became my vow, my mantra. I don't put limits on what my God can do for me or how He can speak to me, because with Him, anything is possible. And that night, in that small room, I finally handed Him everything. No conditions or bargaining, just surrender pure and whole. And God, being who He is, met me there. with grace, with love, and with direction. From that day on, I stopped surviving and started walking in surrender. And here's the part that still undoes me. All of this, every dream, every glimpse of love, every vision of who I really was, came only a week after I left. Just 1 week after I finally turned my face towards him. It was like God reached down, pulled me from the wreckage that was my life, and said, "Take my hand, little one, and walk with me now." Hi everyone, I'm Lacey. This is only the first chapter of the story that God's been writing in my life. And just like in the beginning, when God spoke light into the darkness, my story too began in the dark, where I felt unloved, unheard, and unseen because I begged this man for years to love me, to listen to me, to see my side for only a moment, to see what we had become. And all of my pleading and begging and crying was met with his anger, with his rage, with his yelling, drown out. My emotions were nothing but background noise to him. And while this story is not about him, this is about my relationship with God, I guarantee you this, he is listening now.